Welcome to Tabuk, a podcast about banned and controversial children's books. I'm Adrianna.
And I'm Maria.
And in this episode, we talk about our top 10 books of the 21st century, and we try to figure out what makes a book good anyway.
Okay, that was a little dramatic, but I have a lot of big feelings.
About the New York Times list.
Yes.
Best 100 books of the 20th century.
21st.
So
they assembled it by asking almost 500 authors and critics to submit their top 10 books published since the year 2000.
Nice.
Could be any genre, fiction, nonfiction. And then from those lists of 10, they compiled a single list of 100.
Okay.
It has been a while since
yeah.
we recorded. What's been up with you?
Not much.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. How about you?
I mean, yeah, honestly, same. Just like trying to survive this capitalist hellscape.
Yeah, it's going.
It's going. Yeah.
I'm trying. That's all I can say.
So I want to talk about this New York Times article.
Okay.
So I want to go over what's on the list.
Yeah.
Really quickly, and then we do have a list of 10 books that we think deserve a place on this list of 100 best books. On the New York Times list, number 1, Elena Ferrante.
Yes.
Love her. That was the publishing company I worked at for several years. It's great to see, like, you know, an indie company get this kind of recognition. The books are great. The blurb from the New York Times is like really flattering. It says, the book expands as propulsively as the early universe, encompassing ideas about art and politics, class and gender, philosophy and fate, all through a dedicated focus on the conflicted, competitive friendship between Elena and Lila as they grow into complicated adults.
Oh.
So yeah, happy to see this on the top spot. Like, no issues.
Yeah.
Number 2, The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. This is a nonfiction book about the great migration of Black Americans from South of America to the North and West between 1915 and 1970. Dwight Garner writes in praise, it reads like a novel.
No. I mean, if I feel like people who like nonfiction are always like, oh, I'm so much better than people who read novels. And for them to be like, this is a good nonfiction book because it reads like a novel, like in your face.
Yeah. Dwight Garner is also like one of my favorite reviewers because when he likes a book, he's like very flattering. He's like, he describes it very intelligently. When he hates a book, he's hilarious.
Oh.
I recommend Googling like Dwight Garner Burns or something. He's good. 3, 4, and 5, also novels. Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, historical. The Known World by Edward P. Jones. The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. So, out of the full list, 26 of the 100 are nonfiction. It is like America-centric.
Yes.
As we could see. Like there's some...
As the world is,
indeed.
American centering.
Yeah.
English-speaking centering.
Yeah. There is one sci-fi/fantasy novel.
Oh.
The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin.
Okay.
Rebecca Roanhorse called it a fresh, unstuffy voice, something rare in high fantasy. Which, like, okay, that's giving pick me, but alright, anyway.
It is.
It's also like, I am amused when people can't compliment a book without saying that, like, it's not like its genre.
Yeah.
They're like, oh no, it's not like other girls, it's better.
That's so weird because something that I've come to realize about books is that I enjoy when they give me what is promised, which when it is a genre, it is like, oh, this is high fantasy, this is what you'll run into. And when it hits the spot, I'm like, yes, this is what I wanted, this is a good book. So for them to be like, actually, when you open this book, you're not going to get what you expect from it, is like, well, but is that good? Then maybe it's not in the right genre.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Or maybe like people are biased against fantasy books and they need to like re-examine that.
Yeah.
N.K. Jemisin's like a very good author, but also like interesting that it's the only one. So, why are we talking about this? Why have I locked you here in my crumbling castle, surrounded by ravening wolves? Because this list doesn't have any children's books on it, and that kind of relates to our podcast.
And so I can't leave.
Yeah, mostly I wanted to rant.
Okay, I will listen.
So, on the New York Times, were you going to eat my hand? On the New York Times Book Review podcast, Tina Jordan, who's one of the editors, said that the list was more literary and less fun than she was expecting.
Okay.
Which is like, okay. I do feel like if the New York Times approaches you and asks you to like give your 10 best books, you're going to be like, all right.
You're not going to go with, actually, my favorite book is Charlie Brown, Where is the Great Pumpkin?
Yeah.
Like, whatever.
Even though that is your favorite book, you shouldn't be ashamed. Yeah, and like authors were also allowed to share their 10 best books, which is like great promotion for them. And obviously, like, I bet they wanted to be perceived a certain way.
I would personally, as a person and an author, just look for the 10 most chaotic books I could find.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think that's how I would want to be perceived. People would look at my 10 best books and be like, what?
Yeah, like,
what?
yeah.
Who's even read that book? And I'm like, actually, Where is the Great Pumpkin is the best book of all time.
Yeah. Make the New York Times regret asking you, because your list like becomes more memeable than the 100 list. Yeah. The people that they asked are like quite varied, I guess. Like more varied than the final list would have you think, I guess. There's like a classical pianist who wrote a memoir. There are journalists. There's Stephen King. He's everywhere.
He's everywhere.
There's R.L. Stein, who didn't recommend a single children's book.
Well, for those of you who don't know, he is the writer of the Goosebumps series.
Right.
Yes.
So it could be that he just doesn't read.
Goosebumps is a series of scary children's books.
Yeah, there are poets. Jason Reynolds, who is a children's author as well. And he did recommend children's books.
Good.
He recommended...
As he should.
Yeah, he recommended Love That Dog by Sharon Creech and Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. Neither of which I have read.
Oh, maybe we should.
We should. He's recommended them. Sidebar, I really enjoyed Sarah McLean's top 10. So she's a romance author. And her list, you would like.
I would like.
It includes Dark Needs at Night's Edge by Kresley Cole and Ravishing the Heiress by Sherry Thomas. Like, this woman takes pride in her field, you know? She's like, okay.
She is me.
R.L. Stein chose Atonement. I have no respect for that man.
Oh.
I think this goes into a longer conversation
About why people don't give credit to children's books.
To children's books. About like what makes a book good as well, because I think that's like linked to it, right?
Yeah.
Like there's obviously this underlying assumption
that books for children are not worthy.
And it's not just this list, like they never win major prizes. So like what's that about? Are they actually not that good?
You should read one.
And find out.
Breaking news.
Report back, comment. So I looked at the criteria for winning these major prizes, because I was like, okay, well, what is a good book then? the Nobel Prize, for example. So the candidate should have bestowed the greatest benefit on mankind, and it should be idealistic.
Okay.
Which is obviously like not what people think of when they think of a good book these days, because a lot of people are like, oh, it's the saddest book I can think of.
I know.
Right, like,
people are always like, this book is amazing.
It made me cry.
Cried
Yeah.
the whole way
I
through.
hate that so much.
I don't want to cry.
Yeah, I cry all the time.
Life is sad enough.
Yeah.
I don't need misery porn.
Yeah.
I want to feel happy. I want to feel hope.
Yeah.
I want to enjoy a little bit of my life, which is not even mine. It's just the pages that I'm escaping my life through. You can feel other things. There's other
There
feelings.
are other feelings.
Yes.
What was the Doctor Who quote? Sadness is happiness for deep people or something.
Oh, maybe.
Disgusting. The Booker Prize, Sarah Churchwell, who was a 2012 Booker Prize judge, wrote at length about the judging process, and she was talking about how difficult it was because the process asks of books something that they're not really designed for, to be read 3 times in a row by people probing for weakness. Most books just crumble under that kind of pressure. Only the most rich, the most layered, continue to dazzle and reveal ever more. They did like a kind of tongue-in-cheek, like scientific analysis of what kind of book won the Booker Prize, and they decided that it was a 408-page hardback of 581 grams, published by Bloomsbury in the May before the awards ceremony.
Ah.
It is a work of historical fiction set in and around London. Sometime during the 1980s, the novel incorporates multiple viewpoints, many of them unexpected, think the recently deceased, or a herd of grazing cattle. So that's from the website, The Conversation. I think if you take all these criteria together and you ask yourself, well, what kinds of novels tend to meet all of these, that children's books actually kind of like come out looking pretty good.
They do.
They do tend to be more idealistic.
They
are clearly like meant to be read over and over again.
Yes.
In a way that adult books are not, because kids, if they like something, they will
obsess over it.
Yeah.
As if I didn't.
Yeah, I mean,
children.
SF Said wrote some articles for The Guardian 10 years ago, which is kind of sad, because this is still like a problem. But yeah, he like pointed out the same thing, that a lot of the criteria that adult literary fiction gets praised for, like the kind of rereadability that comes from layered meanings, taking artistic risks, being like super original, like offering insight about what it means to be like a person. Like all of that is found in children's books, and it's just kind of expected. And yet, we talk on this podcast about children's books as targets of book banning. Like they are, in modern day, the primary targets of book bans. So the culture views them as these incredibly powerful things. So they can either like corrupt a child with a single reading, like turn them gay, or, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, they can like inspire a child to be more kind and open-minded. Like regardless of who you are, you understand that like children's books are powerful and important. And it's so strange to me that in these conversations, they're like, people acknowledge that, but they say no, they're not important in like an artistic sense. Whereas like I would argue that leaving a lasting impression on the reader is an aspect of being a good book. Like, that is also part of it, even though that's not mentioned. So, although the New York Times did not ask us, we have assembled a list of 10 books. Children's books published since the year 2000, which I think are as good or better than the adult books on this list.
Yeah.
These are not just like books that are good for kids. These are just good books.
Yeah.
I want to put that out there. Number one, year 2000, coming in right by deadline. The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman. Starting off the millennium with a bang. I think we take Philip Pullman for granted.
Okay.
Just as a society, I don't think we pause often enough to be like, oh my god, he's like around and stuff. Like in my head, it's C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Philip Pullman. Like it's weird that it was written this recently as well. I feel like his Dark Materials has always existed. But yeah, so
to be fair, you have no memories pre-2000s.
That's true. I am very young. So yeah, The Amber Spyglass is the last book in the trilogy. And it's just one of the greatest works of literature that's been written in the last 24 years. Lyra and Will go to the land of the dead. They join the war against heaven. God dies, which is described as a mystery dissolving in mystery. There's that like heartbreaking ending that everybody remembers because it traumatized them if they did read the book as a child. It's like, how can you not include that on a list, you know?
Yeah. I think he was done dirty by his movie. You know, the movie was so bad that I think it just like everyone lost all respect for him, but it like he didn't make the movie.
No.
But,
to be fair, like Lord of the Rings had some really bad film adaptations before Peter Jackson. So maybe, you know,
maybe someday.
Number two.
Two.
Okay. Coraline, 2002. Neil Gaiman. This is in chronological order, by the way. We don't condone Neil Gaiman or his behavior. What a gross guy. Read up on that if you would like. Just wanted to say that. But I do think that Coraline is just like one of the best books written recently. It's so
impressive.
It's short. It doesn't say like one thing too much.
Yeah.
I don't love Neil Gaiman as a writer in general, but I think for younger readers, he really does know when like not to explain something or when like not to give a bit of additional information. And yeah, so your brain is filling in the gaps. You become like an active participant in the fantasy.
Which is really the best way to be a reader.
It respects the child reader as well. The idea of a loved one being replaced by a version that is just slightly off. And
horrifying,
like,
actually.
it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And like even, you know, it's the version that you wanted. Like, why aren't you happy? It's like, there's a lot of like primal fears that it stirs up, which anyone of any age can be like, horrible. Also, like the father, like how like pathetic he became as he like eroded.
Yeah, I remember my sisters watched the movie together, and then they couldn't sleep alone for like weeks on end. It was really funny,
terrifying. 2003, The Book Thief.
The Book Thief
by Marcus Zusak. I think some people don't know that this is a children's book.
I know, yeah. It's something a lot of people read as children, but now think is maybe too grown up. I think.
The book is narrated by Death. He's telling us about Liesel, a young girl living in Nazi Germany, and I think what gets people is like the descriptive style of Death, who is far kinder than the people that Death is describing. And yeah, I mean, like, it's a classic. I think if you haven't read it, you definitely should. But yeah, it made a couple of people's top 10 lists. books, but it did not make the top
the
100.
final top. Yeah, the final top 100.
Yeah. It's also been challenged. Topical. Look, it's our podcast. Yeah, so it had the dark subject matter, sexuality, war. Also, I mean, a lot of people who want to ban books these days also like Nazis, so maybe there's that.
Yeah. Tells you something.
Next, 2005.
2005.
Conrad's Fate by Diana Wynne Jones. Okay.
For those of you who did not know Adrianna in real life, she is a Diana Wynne Jones stan. Like, it is the first and foremost thing about her.
It's the only thing you need to know, really.
Yes.
So, Diana Wynne Jones, an underrated author. A lot of people don't know about her. She was most active in like the 70s and 80s. And I was so smug when I found out that one of her really good books was published post 2000.
Most of you will probably know her. Well, you don't know this, but she wrote Howl's Moving Castle.
Yep.
So if you enjoy that movie, it is from her book. It's an adaptation from her book.
So, Conrad's Fate is Diana Wynne Jones on peak form, and let me tell you why. Conrad, the main character, has been told by his stepfather that he is evil. Basically, he did something so bad in his past life that he has like terrible karma, and it is bringing awful luck to him and everyone he loves. And it's so bad that he will be dead within a year if he doesn't fix it. In order to fix it, he has to go to this big, rich mansion that's like at the top of the mountain and murder someone. So Conrad is sent as basically like a suicide bomber.
Of course.
And the whole thing, like, it's such a dark premise, which is very Diana Wynne Jones, and it just becomes this really silly comedy of manners where he tries to like get a job as a servant in the rich household, and then he's just really awkward. And he's like, how do I polish silver? I hate my life. And also I'm supposed to murder someone. Oh no! Like, you know, just kid things. So yeah, and then like whenever anything bad happens to him or his friends, he's like, oh, it's my fault.
Poor Conrad.
Yeah, like nobody blends darkness and humor like Diana Wynne Jones. I also think, I would say that one element of a good book is when the author describes what it is like to be a person, like or a kind of person that you yourself, the reader, are not like. So you get to experience another, like a person's world or how they perceive reality. Whether it's like a really like old person and their like strange ways, or you know, somebody from a different race, somebody from a different class, somebody from a different time period. Like if they can capture that, that is generally considered good writing. And for some reason, when authors do that for like the experience of childhood, it is
which
not...
is the only one they've actually experienced.
Right, yeah. But is also really hard to capture, I think. Like, it's easy to forget how that feels like. But when authors do that, especially in children's books, people are like, okay, cool. But I think Diana Wynne Jones, in addition to being like an incredible fantasy author, like the way she does fantasy and conceptualizes magic is great, but she also communicates the feeling of childhood better than almost anyone. And she's especially interested in how dangerous childhood is because you just don't know any better. And you are uniquely vulnerable. And she's like really interested in exploring that in her books. So the premise of Conrad, he's being lied to. He's being set up. Like he hasn't done anything wrong, but he truly believes it. Like
yeah, poor Conrad.
yeah, I think that as an adult that hits different, and it's
Yeah.
like much scarier.
Number 5.
Number 5 is The Arrival, 2006.
This is a picture book.
This is a picture book. It's by Sean Tan. It has no relation to the movie.
It is very unsettling, I would
Yeah.
say. Like, it has no words, almost, from what I remember.
It has no words at all.
And it like, combines real, like, aspects of life with, like, a magical, like, fantasy life that just doesn't exist. It's really, it's a weird experience, but it stays with you, which I think is what we're saying it makes a good book for the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is almost unsettling. I think almost more so as an adult.
Yeah.
When you see like these cityscapes, but they're like off.
They're like, yeah, something's off.
Yeah.
Like about the whole book. It's like about a man who is immigrating to another country, I believe, without his family. He's like trying to bring them with him, but he doesn't at first. And there's just like always a tiny element on the page that is not what you would expect to be there, or is completely unexpected to be there, and you're like,
Number 6.
The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins.
This is 2008. This is, I think, like our nod to the culture.
What can we say about The Hunger Games that has not been said before? It is incredible.
Okay, I don't love them as books.
I love them. I think they're so good. I hate the movies.
Okay,
the
yeah.
movies suck.
Yeah.
They're so bad.
Right.
I watched 5 minutes and I walked out. I was like, no. And I just walked out.
What's fascinating to me, not even Harry Potter has the kind of mainstream cultural relevance that
Yeah.
the Hunger Games has.
The Hunger Games is so, like, you watch the Met Gala, like, you look at the pictures and you're like,
It's giving
these
you capital.
people eat and then vomit for fun and then keep eating. And meanwhile, I am counting pennies just to make ends meet month after month.
I find it interesting that, like, the Harry Potter books, for example, which came out like right before like this global rise of fascism and are technically about fascism rising. Obviously, like any moral power they had was like undermined by J.K. Rowling being a right-wing, awful transphobic person.
But even before, they weren't as culturally relevant.
Yeah,
is what you're
nobody's
saying.
saying, oh, you're like a Death Eater, like in the public
think
square.
The most like culturally relevant thing is Dobby has been given a sock. Dobby is free, and I feel like I hear people say that a lot. But
The
like other
meme.
than that, I think it's just like it's not like the Hunger Games where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like this is how Katniss felt actually. Yeah.
Number 7, Liesl and Poe by Lauren Oliver. This came out in 2011, and this is, I think, an obscure one, but I will make an argument for this. I
Yeah.
realize I have read this and you have not.
Yes.
Also, like a second Liesl for our list.
Yeah.
What are the chances? It starts with the sentence, on the 3rd night after the day her father died, Liesl saw the ghost. So the ghost doesn't remember who it was when it was alive, but it is drawn to Liesl. It does not know why. Liesl, whose father has just died, wants to know more about what death is like. And together they start on a journey. There's a cruel stepmother. There's
Of course.
there's a murder plot. There's like a mix-up with a box, an evil alchemist. But that's not really what's central to the story. The center of the story is the imminence of death and hope and love, which are all kind of part of the same thing. This was written in the 2 months after the death of the author's best friend.
Aww.
And I think its depiction of death is very beautiful and like strangely comforting. It's definitely more comforting than The Book Thief.
Valid.
So like there's this line which goes, when she's asking about her father, he might have already begun the process of becoming a part of everything. He would begin to feel the electricity from distant stars pulsing through him like a heartbeat. He would feel the weight of old planets on his shoulders, and he would feel the winds of distant corners of the universe blowing through him. And the book also does something really interesting with the plot, which sort of goes back to the stereotype of the Booker Prize winner, where it's like, oh, it's told from the perspective of a herd of cows. But it has multiple viewpoints. That's not super novel, but it splits like a relatively simple plot up between different characters in a way that is, I think, quite sophisticated. Because none of the characters are actually experiencing a coherent narrative.
Okay.
They are sort of contributing their bit to the plot.
Oh.
And they're sort of just chiming in as like elements of this
that sounds
beautiful
cool.
like tapestry. Yeah, so like as the reader, you experience a really satisfying plot with rising action, falling action, where you would expect.
Yeah.
But the individual characters are just going about their day. They're not. They don't know how, like the threads of fate weave everything together. Yeah, and it just sort of adds to the sense of like vastness and wonder and awe. It's beautifully written. It's another book that like not a word is out of place. And yeah, it honestly, it feels like Booker Prize bait. It's super underrated. I would recommend it. It's also incredibly short. You could read it in a sitting.
Number 8 is
Long Way Down, 2017, by Jason Reynolds, who was one of the authors the New York Times asked. So this is a novel in verse. I've raved about this novel to you before. But it is about 15-year-old Will. His older brother has been shot, and he finds the older brother's gun and decides to shoot the person who killed his brother. He lives on the 7th floor of his apartment building, and he gets on the elevator, and the whole novel takes place in the time that it takes to get to the ground floor.
nice.
Because at each stop, a ghost gets on.
A ghost.
A ghost, and not just any ghost, but someone who is dead because of gun violence. So there's like Kate, who was killed by a stray bullet, and Kate asks Will what he would do if he misses his target. So it is a story about like the cycle of violence. I also think that the premise just sounds like a one-act play that would take like off-Broadway by storm.
That's true.
Number 9. And I did have trouble narrowing this list down. We both did. But 2018, The Assassination of Brangwyn Spurge by M.T. Anderson and Eugene Yelchin. I think I will explain why I think this book is so good. It is definitely enjoyable for adults. I first read it as an adult, obviously. It is fantasy. It is about Brangwyn Spurge. This guy is an elf, and the elves and the goblins have been at war forever. Brangwyn Spurge,
As always.
is sent into the goblin area, and the person who meets him is Verfel, the goblin historian, who's actually just super pumped to meet like an elf. He's just so excited.
I thought you were gonna say super pumped us and like he was like
He's
jacked.
super swole. And that's why I think. So like the book is sort of like, oh, these people would be friends except for politics. And you know, you can apply this to any intractable conflict between two groups of people. But what makes it so good is that it is heavily illustrated. And the illustrations do not match the text, because the text is like what happened. And the illustrations are Brangwyn Spurge is a spy, and he is communicating telepathically with the elves, and he is sending back his perception of what happened, which is wild.
She's betraying Verfel?
Yeah. Don't worry, it ends happily. But, you know, something normal will happen, and Verfel's like, yeah, that's just, you know, our friendly pet, whatever. That's just an example. And then it'll be depicted as like the most harrowing monster. And this is never like called out in the text. You have to notice this yourself, and you're like, what the heck is happening here? But once you do, yeah, it's you know, it's actually a dual narrative.
That's so fun.
And it's also really fun to again reread. And
At least 3 times.
indeed, Booker Prize, where were you?
Last but not least,
number 10, 2019, Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. We've already talked about this at length on our podcast.
Yeah. I think it like makes it easy to understand an experience that is not common in the human experience, and not make it feel like it's weird. It's like, oh, like this is just this person's way of having grown up, and it feels normal, and it feels like you just accept it. You're like, okay, cool, that's not what I lived, but that is also okay.
Yeah.
And it's similar enough in this and this and that I can understand and empathize with you.
Right. It is written with the understanding that the reader probably doesn't share all of this person's experiences. So the book is very careful about explaining what things feel like and the rationale behind certain decisions. Tegan O'Neill in the Comics Journal described it as like telling the world all your most excruciating personal secrets while also making them aesthetically pleasing and readable. And I was like, yeah, that's this book. Yeah.
Fair.
It's also been banned
a few times just because of the, you know, queerness.
Yeah, allegedly for child pornography. So thus completes our 10-book list. New York Times.
And thus I am free.
Yes.
I hope.
You are. I unlock the gates.
Thank you.
You may go. As may you, dear listener. But I hope you will check out some of these books if you haven't already, if they sound interesting to you. And I hope you will tell us what books you think should have made the New York Times list. Let us know. What did we miss? If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment. If you aren't, then we do have social media. We are at tabuk_pod.
Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful time until we see you again.
Bye! Brat Summer happened, and now it's over.
You don't know that?
No. Okay, anyway, moving swiftly on.